When it comes to the classical psychedelics, one would expect that each demonstrates similar experiences, visuals, and emotions due to similar development processes. This, however, is not quite the case, as the category straddles the line between substances that occur in naturally growing matter and those synthesized in a lab. In order to understand the significance of this difference, we must first discuss the qualities that make the hallucinogen subclass of psychedelics unique. For those who have previous knowledge of psychedelic history, the name Alexander or Sasha Shulgin may not be new. Most specifically, you may know him for the delivery of 2 books on compound synthesis and effects, Phenethylamines I've Known and Loved, and Tryptamines I've Known and Loved. The pair exist for the purpose of chronicling Shulgin's experimentation with psychoactive substances and delivering the necessary information for repeated trials provided the reader has adequate knowledge of chemistry and supplies. Each begins with a semi-autobiographical novel telling the story of the Shulgins before delivering the instructions needed to synthesize a number of compounds, many of which were invented by the authors themselves, along with the results of their self-experimentation. Pause. It's important to note that, while the novelizations loosely connect with the lives of Alexander and his wife, they are fictionalizations of true events that do not reflect a proper historical or legal account. Unpause. As I was researching for this video, one of my biggest questions was, why write 2 books? Both classes are psychedelic, so what's the difference? As I would come to discover, tryptamines are known for their similarity to tryptophan, an amino acid that forms in the human brain and stomach. Featuring public enemy number 1 heavy hitters like LSD, psilocybin, and DMT, these compounds are often considered to be the serotonergic substances because of the relationship they force with the brain's serotonin receptors following ingestion. Phenethylamines, on the other hand, are stimulant drugs, targeting the L-phenethylamine amino acid, which acts as one of the body's nervous stimulants. I'm most fascinated by the fact that these compounds can be developed from a number of angles, from multiple kingdoms even. Ayahuasca's components are products of the plant kingdom, psilocybin a product of the fungal kingdom, 5-MeO-DMT a product of the animal kingdom, and, if we were to consider humans a kingdom, LSD and MDMA exemplify our own contributions. For many of these kingdoms, the synthesis of substances such as these are the direct results of evolution. In humanity's case, however, it's imperative to remember that we followed the footsteps of the other kingdoms entirely by accident in order to get to this point in pharmaceutical history. On April 19, 1945, Swiss researcher Albert Hofmann cycled home under the influence of 0.25 milligrams of lysergic acid dithalamide 25, a compound he had synthesized from ergot, a fungus that grows on rye, in 1943. It is important to note that LSD is incredibly potent and is traditionally measured in micrograms or millionths of a gram. This converts Hofmann's dose to around 250 micrograms, or 2.5 times what is considered to be an effective dose. This mistake would go on to make the first intentional LSD trip in known history simultaneously into the first bad one. As the substance took hold, Hofmann looked to his lab partner and explained that he was feeling unwell and needed to return home. With World War II restricting the use of motor vehicles, the chemist took bicycles through the streets of Switzerland on a journey that has now been cemented in the pages of hallucinogenic history as Bicycle Day. Upon reaching his home, Hofmann rooted himself to the sofa, and his colleague called for a doctor. This doctor's visit proved rather confusing, as all of Hofmann's vital signs remained completely normal. The only defining aspect of his psychoactive undertaking was a pair of incredibly dilated pupils that have now become characteristic of acid trips. Instead of the physical effects he had predicted, LSD altered the functions of his mind and consciousness, allowing him to experience a phenomenon that has now become known as ego death. He described it as such, quote, "A demon had invaded me, had taken possession of my body, mind, and soul. I jumped up and screamed, trying to free myself from him, but then sank back down. My ego was suspended somewhere in space, and I saw my body lying dead on the sofa." 34 years later, Hofmann published a memoir entitled LSD, My Problem Child, Reflections on Sacred Drugs, Mysticism, and Science. Part history textbook and part opinion piece, Hoffman tells the story of LSD from its roots in psychiatric research through the psychedelic 60s and landing in the prohibitionist atmosphere of its date of publication in 1979. While he did call the discovery his problem child, a note written by Jonathan Ott, the book's English translator, states, quote, LSD, psilocybin, and the other hallucinogens do indeed, as Albert Hoffman asserts, constitute cracks in the edifice of materialistic rationality, cracks we would do well to explore, and perhaps widen. End quote. In many cultures, psychedelics are used in a spiritual sense, inspiring dialogue surrounding philosophy, psychology, and religion. To me, there's something deeply brilliant on nature's part when it comes to the synthesis of psychedelic compounds, especially from an evolutionary standpoint. Paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould states that there is no evidence of biological change in humans over the last 40 to 50,000 years, with common theories believing evolution to have halted entirely with the invention of agriculture some 10,000 years ago. That being said, it would be impossible for human society to reach the institutional prowess of the modern world without nearly constant cognitive evolution. The survival of the fittest that determines which traditions, rituals, and norms make the cut versus those that are lost to time in any given culture. In theory, all compounds are naturally synthesized in some way or another, purely because humanity evolved into a level of understanding by which we are capable of synthesizing previously non-existent drugs, such as LSD and MDMA. By the same token, psilocybin-containing mushrooms have evolved to produce a chemical that exists to reduce consumption by other species. By looking at the birth of these and similar compounds from a wider lens, we see that, for varying intents, each psychoactive chemical currently involved in therapeutic trials is the product of purposeful biological evolution or refined through experimentation, whether that be for self-preservation of the species or cognitive expansion of another. In this sense, the coexistence of natural and synthesized substances is quite poetic. Each exists as a representation of evolutionary progress, demonstrating just how intelligent our natural surroundings can be. Currently, there are known trees, cacti, fungi, and animals that all exhibit the natural production of psychoactive compounds. By choosing a large pool of substances during these early trial periods, we have greater potential to discover the most ideal therapeutic methods at a much faster rate, and by combining the use of natural and synthesized substances in the therapeutic field, there is immense potential for a renaissance of scientific understanding when it comes to the effects of these compounds on the human psyche. Most often, nature and nurture keep to their own in the drug world, but when instances of coexistence appear from the woodwork, they often become the most extraordinary cases on the spectrum of psychoactive substances. Take, for example, psilocybin. Throughout the medical LSD boom of the 1950s and subsequent recreational boom of what would become known as the psychedelic 60s, psilocybin hid from prying eyes, having directly influenced Central and South American ethnobotany and culture for centuries. While psilocybin-containing strains of mushroom grew and continue to grow in the more humid forests of the United States, this was unknown by the majority of the populace until decades later. These circumstances created a climate in which only those who made the pilgrimage below the U.S. border could experience the effects of multiple hallucinogenic drugs that would eventually be considered mainstream in their field. Enter household names such as Terence McKenna, who made this journey for the purposes of their own experiences and, more importantly, the delivery of psychoactive fungi to their home countries. This period of time would prove to be instrumental in the genetic development of a subspecies so unique that it would prove to outclass its ancestors in potency when a graduate student by the name of Richard Gutierrez received direct descendants of McKenna's collection of Amazonian mushrooms and began selling spore prints. Allow me to offer a disclaimer here. Gutierrez is a rather elusive man, with his two most recent known interviews occurring in 1998 and 2022, leaving a radio silence large enough that his escapades are reaching a state of urban legend rather than history. This being the case, I'm going to take some time to diverge from the conversation of psychedelic synthesis to relay the true depth of his influence on the field. The genetic experimentation that would eventually develop the most potent strain of psychoactive mushrooms in the world began when Gutierrez and a colleague by the name of Jules Stevens chose to dedicate a study to the contents of an octagonal fish tank. This tank contained what they knew to be the aforementioned descendants of the psilocybin genus that had been brought back to the US by Terence McKenna. Of the 3 strains in the tank, 2 performed as expected, growing to standard yield and demonstrating psychoactivity through blue bruising, a process in which some of the fruits grow blue spots that visually indicate the presence of psilocybin. The third, however, had a number of fruits with their heads bent toward the ground, and spots that were dark blue to the point of becoming black. It was at this point that Stevens and Gutierrez became aware that there was something very different about this particular strain. Pause. For those who are not versed in the mycological dictionary, I'll leave little up to guesswork. The organism that we identify as mushrooms only shows a small percentage of its mass above ground. The rest is dedicated to a network of root-adjacent connectors called mycelium. Mycelium holds a pivotal place in ecosystems due to its ability to connect plant networks and inspire electric communication below ground while holding the soil itself in place. While it is not the focus of this segment, understanding mycelium opens a door to understanding why exactly mushrooms are identified as a relative middle ground between flora and fauna. In my humble opinion, the best educational bang for your buck comes from a Netflix original documentary called Fantastic Fungi. Mycelium can be seen like a fruit tree. While the trees themselves are the organism, they grow fruits for the purpose of spreading seed in order to create new generations. The same process occurs with mushrooms. Furthermore, let's address every pharmacological topic's elephant in the room: potency. When it comes to psilocybin, mushrooms that are taken for hallucinogenic effects are almost always of the Psilocybe cubensis genus. Those with experience in mycology communities may be familiar with the saying that a cube is a cube, relating to a relatively equal potency between common strains. While exceptions exist, the most notable is often considered to be the penis envy mushroom. Unpause. Back at the fish tank, our scientists found themselves looking at black spots. Knowing what we now know about blue bruising, I'll bet you can guess how the 2 graded this particular strain's potency. While Stevens and Gutierrez knew that they had come upon a mushroom that had the potential to hold effects unparalleled in the US, there was one problem. The batch hadn't performed well compared with the 2 normal batches in the tank, demonstrating a large population of unusable fruits. According to Gutierrez, the genetics that caused this simultaneously made spore printing almost impossible, making it difficult to continue the lineage of the strain and even harder to propagate it by giving prints to others. This did little to deter the scientists' efforts, however, and they pressed on. Continuing to grow and sell the 2 additional Amazonian strains, Stevens and Gutierrez continued their experiments on countless generations of the new strain, each time meeting the same issue.
Just a few little mushrooms and a lot of aborts.
By the 5th generation, each batch was yielding a significant quantity of acceptable mushrooms that still had trouble producing spores, and, in the event they did, Gutierrez still found difficulty in retrieving quality prints from the caps. At this stage, even when the rest of the process had gone according to plan, there was a high likelihood of spore inviability. Coming to this point, there is a gap in historical record until the successful propagation of the mushroom. Gutierrez is on record telling Vice journalist Hamilton Morris that, after the genetics were perfected for consistency, the mushrooms were sold as both fruits and spore prints until they were given the contemporary name penis envy by a group of Seattle strippers who had visited his apartment and noticed the fruit's resemblance. Descendants of this original fish tank strain of Amazonians were grown in Seattle until, according to Gutierrez, the genetic line came to an end in 2020. To this day, the penis envy mushroom stands as the most potent psilocybin-containing strain in the fungal kingdom. Gutierrez's story stands as a testament to the potential of combining natural and scientific evolution in the psychedelic sphere. When a species finds meaning in progress, the world evolves at an almost constant rate. I'm writing this script between short glances at my porch railing. Years since it was last painted, the wood shows its wear. In a climate where only the fittest sections of paint survive, I can watch day by day as the structure loses its color. Looking at the stories of Hoffman and Gutierrez through this lens, it becomes clear that humans hold the keys to accelerated evolution, as seen in Albert Hoffman's discoveries. Looking at science on this scale can produce an illusion of grandeur. With just a little perseverance, humans are capable of doing great things. Of course, it's easy to forget the basic fact that makes these discoveries accessible to the public today. Neither of them were prevented from pursuing their course of action, whether that be from lack of discovery in Gutierrez's case, or complete legality of research in Hoffman's. Just as humans can accelerate societal evolution by facilitating discovery, they can just as easily prevent it by forcefully creating dark ages. In recent history, such an age has occurred, starting in the 1970s, when a war broke out in the United States. Hey, thanks for watching. Especially thank you for watching to the end. While most YouTubers might ask you to like and subscribe, if you like this video, the only thing that I ask is you send it to somebody else who might be interested in the subject. Next time, we're going to talk about the 1970s, the war on drugs, and the effects that it's had in our modern climate. See you there.